This video is made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.
Hi there, my name is Willem. I'm the European Associate Editor for Nintendo World Report. Last August, I got to interview Andrew Shouldice, who's the creative director behind Tunic, on the game Tunic. However, this was before he confirmed that the Nintendo Switch would be getting a port of Tunic later in September. So this interview is a more broad approach to his overall game design and what aspects he wanted to highlight while creating Tunic. Because it's a more general interview, I did go into some spoiler territory for the game. So if you want to go into Tunic totally blind, which is understandable, maybe not watch this video until you've played the game. However, if you still want to know why Tunic is so important, don't worry. I've added a spoiler tag which consists of this sound, accompanied by this image. If you hear that noise or see this on screen, that means that this segment will contain a spoiler. You can skip ahead using the timecode or the chapters in the description of the video. Additionally, Gamescom is a very loud conference, so the audio quality isn't entirely perfect, but you should still be able to hear this. Additionally, the video footage that you're seeing for this video is captured using the Xbox Series S version of Tunic. It will only show the first opening hour of the game, so do not worry about potential spoilers in the video footage. That having been said, sit back, relax, and enjoy this interview with Andrew Shouldice.
Hi, Willem. I'm from a publication called Nintendo World Report. That should probably ring a bell like, wait a second, that's not a platform Tunic is on. So there's two reasons why I really wanted to talk to you. One is Tunic in its design and inspiration is very Nintendo inspired, I figured. So I thought it would be interesting. Also, just talking about how you approach game design from a certain angle, as well as, of course, the things about the game that really click with me personally. So I'm going to be very biased. I finished it. It's one of my top games of the year so far.
Wow, thank you.
It was so impressive, the journey from beginning to end. That leads me to my first question is, what I found interesting about Tunic is that its design is really inspired by old adventure games, really not giving the player a lot of guidance. How do you design a game where you want to kind of avoid the player going straight to the guide?
Interesting.
Because the manual is a guide in a sense, but it's also really not the answer to everything.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you're writing for a Nintendo publication, but we actually do have. There's a separate thing that's like we're releasing a PlayStation on the 27th, and that has a game help thing built into it. So we put in some extra effort to build a guide into the game. You just press a button and get extra hints. So it's relevant to what you're talking about, because yes, people, I think there is a tendency to get to the point where you feel, oh wait, I'm missing something. Let me just go figure out what it is. It's probably I missed something. I don't care to figure it out. Let's just go check it out. There are some people who eschew that entirely and get into the mindset early on of this is a game where I'm not supposed to understand anything, and I'm really going to sink my teeth into the discovery of what's going on. So what we want to do is, the people that are already in that mindset, just let them have fun in this world that's not going to tell them anything. But the other people, we want to ease them into this feeling of slowly discovering that there is more to this game, and there are secrets in it. So early on in the game, it sort of plays it straight, if that makes sense. You go forward, the controls are very simple to start with. You wake up on the beach, nothing happens, it doesn't tell you to do anything, you just push the stick around. You are given some tutorialization about how to, assign items, and then you get a key, you open a door, maybe you see a cutscene. It's all it's playing it straight, it's by the numbers, get a sword, keep going. And it's not until a little bit later in the game that you start to get into these situations where you realize there's more going on, there's further secrets. And one of the ways that we try to hide those things is, you've probably heard it before, hidden in plain sight.
Right.
And what that means is the first time you discover one of those secrets, you realize, A, this game has secrets, but B, most often they were accessible to you from the start. And so this hopefully encourages people into that first category again, where they'll start to realize, oh, part of the joy of this game is not knowing about something that is possible, because that is what fires the imagination, right? Once you realize that it's the example that people often give is Nintendo publication, Zelda, bombable walls. We all know about bombable walls, but imagine yourself in 1986 or 1987 playing Zelda 1 for the first time, and you're like, oh cool, this game has bombs in it, and then accidentally discovering a bombable wall. Suddenly now every wall is a question mark, right? And that's my favorite kind of secret, is not just, hey, there's a prize here at the end of, I solved the puzzle and there's a reward, but realizing that there's another dimension to the secrets of the game. Things that I didn't even think could contain secrets now have potential for them to be there. And it's a tricky thing to balance, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. My playthrough was the finding the page for the I call it prayer, and then the realizing, oh my god, this interacts with so much. And even for the little things, you start using that technique and playing around with it. So how did you try to not overwhelm the player with that sort of abilities? Because there's a lot stacked on top of each other, and it can compound really quickly, especially due to the harsh difficulty.
Yeah, we tried to pace it a little bit. So the key on door, that's one of the first things you do. Fight some monsters. I know how to respawn. It's all very by the books. Get a sword, fantastic. Can cut down bushes. Again, sort of Metroidvania styling. Then we sort of let people explore a little bit more. There's sort of like a more open-ended area, like this area.
Yeah.
You need to explore a little bit more. You can find some passages that maybe, that's when we introduced the idea that, you can approach this world from multiple directions, and sometimes you'll come from a direction that you weren't expecting and realize the world's a little bit interconnected. So we've layered that on top. And then shortly after doing that, you will get your shield, and then you get the manual page that tells you how to upgrade your stats. And so we're trying to do this slowly, and it's tricky because the game is meant to make you feel like you are exploring a thing that wasn't made for you. But of course, it's a video game, it's designed, and that experience needs to be crafted very carefully. And so we sort of layered on each of these things very slowly, and the hope is that people are probably going to get overwhelmed, but they're probably going to be overwhelmed when 2 or 3 of those things bunch up, as opposed to 9 of them all at once.
I found myself really enjoying the game, but there was this sort of disconnect at times where I feel like, hey, I'm approaching this as a Zelda game, like exploration, finding secrets, using my knowledge gained throughout the game to proceed. But I did find it at times where it was kind of it was clashing with a design that's more Souls-like in orientation. I don't think that's a proper way to describe it, but I think that at sometimes you feel a sort of disconnect between gameplay design, ideas falling on top of each other. Where like at some point I was like, I probably need to grind my statistics to beat this boss, even when the manual page for the first boss says, oh, you need 3 to beat him. That is something that I think the game really uses multiple layers to approach that for any type of player. But then there's also the accessibility option, right, where you can turn it off if it's really too much, which I will admit, like for one of the bosses I kind of had to, and I didn't feel bad about it because I felt like you as the developer handing it to the player and saying like, here's a way to do this even if you're disinvested into it.
Yep.
How did you find that you needed both that high difficulty level pretty early on, right? It feels early on in the game, but also still allowing the player to use that accessibility to proceed if they feel as necessary? Was that always something you intended?
So, no, the accessibility option came pretty late in development, but it was the sort of thing that we had planned for sort of vaguely. Oh, accessibility is important. We need to make sure that, we can turn off flashing lights and certain sort of, and we got feedback from the community from like the demo and stuff that helped there. And one of them was, what about combat? Like I talked about, being able to look up a guide, that will help with the puzzly sides of things. So if you're like, I don't really feel like figuring out this puzzle, you can just look it up, easy. If you don't feel like doing the combat, what are you supposed to do? And there was a little bit of internal thinking like, hey, wait, it's a game that's supposed to be like challenging and make you feel that you are really earning your way into this exciting world that's full of danger. But it turns out it doesn't require much thought to realize that people who enjoy that sort of difficulty aren't going to use those options.
Right.
And so including it there was sort of a no-brainer. It just made total sense. And what we could do is that early on, just before you get the sword, there is an area that I think is like 10% to 20% too hard. And I wanted to tone it down a little bit, but I got convinced not to do it by the QA team because I realized, no, you're right. This is the point when we educate people about the difficulty of the game. You need to be able to dodge. You need to be able to be a little bit afraid when that scary monster with the sword is there.
Yeah.
And that initial feeling, I think, sets the tone for the rest of it. And if you then want to turn off the combat, you can. You know what the game is trying to communicate. It's challenging. Even when you turn on no fail mode, you still need to like land the hits. Right? It just means that you're not sent back as far and you don't get frustrated with it.
Kind of the interesting thing, especially with boss battles, where I find myself the one where I actively made the decision, okay, this is where I'm not gonna be able to do it, was the underground area with the mining boss, the boss with the
scavenger boss, yeah.
Which is very difficult.
It's very difficult.
And even I was pretty decent with stats, but I still found like going back to explore even more, I felt like I wasn't given the tools with the manual to find out where the new upgrades would have been.
Right.
That seems like a very tricky balance because each player approaches the secrets in a different way or finds one early on.
Yeah.
Or there's not a specific route, right?
Yeah, so there's the way that we had to do that, and there are still some things that I would tweak, I think. But I can't now because speedrunners would yell at me.
Right.
They're lovely. Speedrunners are
Yeah,
great.
no, they're great.
The upgrades to attack and defense are really the critical ones. And so what we did is make sure that they are not on diverticula. They're not on secret paths. They're always in the main progression. So, and they're always generally in a place where there isn't combat. So you're not going to run past a chest that has one of the actually critical upgrades because a little bit of extra stamina or magic is probably not going to determine whether or not the fight is possible or impossible. But attack and defense were the things that we had there as sort of gates to be like, you can technically do this if you're one level underneath, but it's going to be really hard.
Right.
And so if people, bumble their way into one of the areas really early, that's going to encourage them to explore some other avenues and find those more obvious secrets. But I admit that it's pretty tricky. Like some of that was drawn from Souls games, which use a very different way of doing it, where you make extremely slow incremental progress, as opposed to this, which is discrete, important upgrades that are represented by things in the world. So you can't just, grind your way to level 99 or something like that. So yeah, it's certainly a challenge.
Yeah. Was the wish from your end always to incorporate that whole Souls-like difficulty challenge from the beginning? Or is that something that grew over time as you realize, well, the exploration is half the fun, right? You need something to get engaged with there continuously.
Yeah.
Is difficulty in that sense a cornerstone of the development for you?
So really the root, whenever I think about the game and I think about it's like the root emotion, the communication, the idea that I want to communicate is this feeling of exploring a thing that you're not supposed to, right? Feeling like you're transgressing. You found a secret you're not supposed to find. You discovered or found a puzzle that doesn't feel like it's meant to be solved. And that means that you feel like you're a true explorer, right? If something is just handed to you, it doesn't feel as important. And on the combat side of things, you can help convey that feeling by having hard combat. Like you want to feel brave when you take on something because it's not just mash the button. It's like, okay, this is going to be a challenge. I'm probably going to die. I'm scared. I'm worried. And
the Steam Engine boss, for example, was one of those where I was really like, I think I can do this.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I think I've been given all the tools. I did the exploration. I can do this. It's just a matter of understanding the movement, learning the patterns, and then improving on that as
You
well.
could do it. This giant thing,
Yeah,
and you're just so
exactly.
small. You can do it. I believe in you. Yeah, you can do it. I believe in you is sort of like what the game wants to say, but it can't. It needs to be like, no, this is an impossible task. You will never do it. But actually, yes, you can.
Yeah.
Anyway, so early on, the idea of some amount of challenging combat was there. The game originally was much more Soulsy, like way back when I was first starting development. Like the stamina bar was a more traditional stamina, like attacking used stamina, and if you ran out, you couldn't do anything. And that felt really bad because you're a little fox. You're supposed to run around. You're supposed to be full of energy constantly. And so it changed a lot. And there are still things like, stamina and dodge rolling and stuff like that. But it ended up pulling more from other games, I think, than Souls. But what remained, I think, hopefully, was this feeling of slowly exploring a hostile world, opening shortcuts, sort of shrinking it in your mind so you understand how it's connected, and realizing that there's more of a story here than maybe it's letting on. Because again, just like flipping through a manual when you can't read all the words, which is, I guess, that's a Nintendo connection there. That sort of feeling of like transgressing, that being in a place where you're not supposed to be, comes from combat, from exploration, from lots of things.
Regarding what you said about the manual, I want to talk about language and the usage of it. Tunic from the opening presents itself as, we won't give you all the words and the things to communicate. And from a personal note, I'm not English. I grew up in the Netherlands. I learned English through playing video games. So there was always like a sort of wonder behind each meaning of the word because you could reinterpret them. Example from my end, I used the repel on the Snorlax in Pokemon Red and Blue because I thought, oh, that made Pokemon go away, so it might move this one. Not understanding how language is used as a way to communicate stuff to the player on multiple levels.
Yeah.
So, that being said, Tunic uses, I think, multiple languages.
Sort of.
Yeah. And personally, I found a couple of the clues for interpreting that, but I'm not the one that's like, I'm going to dissect everything, everywhere.
You're not supposed to.
Right. So, when was that choice made that you really wanted to? Was it just because you wanted to add an art mystery to it, or does it feel like it's a connecting tissue in the world itself?
It was really early on that I wanted to have some sort of secret language. Even before the idea of the manual was part of it, which is like, if there's a thing that is Tunic, it is the manual, I think. And so even before that, because I was looking through my notes, somebody asked me the other day, and I'm like, wait a second, the language came first before the manual idea. It's kind of wild. But yeah, it's exactly what you said, this feeling of feeling like you're in a place where you don't belong, that something isn't made for you. I am Canadian, and so I grew up reading English and French manuals.
Yeah,
But even when I was reading them, I was, a child, just learning how to read. And I remember things like looking at the manual for Metroid 2, which is a Game Boy game, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't have it, my next door neighbor did. And Game Boy, famously bad for looking over the shoulder. So I couldn't watch them play, right? So I had to be content to read the manual. And I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's like black and red.
Yeah, it's very chunky, big pixels, but also very claustrophobic to be around.
Yeah, exactly. And the manual is printed in the like really stark colors, and it's got these grotesque illustrations of monsters and like orbs. Like what is it called? Not spin. Screw tap. Yeah, like seeing these and like tanks full of energy. Like looking at these illustrations in the manual, it just made my imagination go wild. The thing about those old games is that they needed to fit on these little cartridges, right? They needed to run on a Nintendo or a Game Boy.
Yeah.
And so the game that existed in my head, reading the manuals, was not constrained by this, right?
Right.
And so it was much grander and wilder. And I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, there's like a lava cavern and all these cool items and monsters and lore. And it can just get bigger and bigger and bigger in your head because I'm not the one sitting there looking at the little pea green screen. And so that was a formative experience. Also, when I was extremely small, playing Super Mario Brothers. I'm trying to lean the Nintendo content. I remember playing that and getting to the warp zone at the end of 1-2.
Right.
And even for an English speaker who's learning to speak English, I had probably seen the word welcome before, but I guarantee I'd never seen the word warp or zone before. And so arriving there as a child, it was perfect because I did the put 2 and 2 together thing, like as a whatever it was, 3 or 4 year old.
You see the pipes, the world, the numbers.
Yeah, and you're like, wait, I can get up there, I can go past the end of the level. What's there? Oh my god! Strange text appears on the screen. I have no idea what to do, and that was terrifying and exciting. And I mean, that's the idealized Tunic experience, is sort of bumbling into something, putting 2 and 2 together, and realizing like, whoa, there's more to this than I could ever possibly imagine, and I don't understand what's going on. Like that's the good stuff.
How did the porting process turn out for you? Because it was an Xbox exclusive for a very long time. Also, I think the manual in general is something that has to be redesigned to accommodate for different controllers. How do you go about that process? Just a question of, well, triangle is now X or etc.
Yeah, so the manual is originally what I wanted to do was design the manual, print it out, scan it, and have it be in the game.
Right.
And distress it and everything. But what I ended up doing is doing exactly that, but not printing the manual, just having a blank one. And the reason for that was because the manual is generated live. Even though it has this like cool halftone shader where it looks like it's got print artifacts and everything, it's all of the text, like the game's localized to 27 languages. And so that all needs to be composited in at runtime. There's also the you are here. We've got the map up there at the very bottom at the starting point. There's a you are here marker that updates live, and it still needs to have the halftone shader applied. So that and all the button prompts and everything. So I think even on PC, if you plug in a PlayStation controller, it'll have the right button inputs and everything.
Oh, that's great.
Which is really good. But yeah, there's that, and then making sure you've got the controller graphics correct and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yes, it was a challenge, but we sort of planned ahead for it a little bit.
So if it were to ever get a physical release, would you include a manual?
That's a good question. I really like the idea of having a manual, and obviously I like physical artifacts. I like old school manuals. So yes, that would be cool. If it ever existed, I would probably encourage people to play the game before flipping through it.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to do it.
I was particularly impressed by the audio design, and the music has gotten a lot of praise as well.
Yes.
Did you know immediately from the start what kind of vibe for the audio design you wanted to go with?
Yeah.
Or was that something that layered on in the process of the
it certainly developed as we went. So I didn't do any of the audio design or music. I did some direction, but it was mostly Kevin Regany of Power Up Audio, that's a Vancouver, Canada outfit, who did the audio design, and Lifeformed, and that's Terrence Lee, and Janice Kwan did the music. And I had listened to Terrence's music. He did the soundtrack to the Double Fine documentary. If you know that. Yeah. I was listening to that when I was thinking about these games full of mystery, and it was just so perfect. Even the names of the tracks in that album, like A Coin Under Every Rock and stuff like that, made me think this person gets it. And so I reached out, and he said, yeah, he wanted to do music, and so I would give him sort of emotional cross sections of what I want. This is an area where you're exploring in this sunshiny world. Here's a place where you're descending to the depths of the earth. Here's the scavenger boss fight. I was like, it's basically, have you ever fought Father Gascoigne in Bloodborne? It's meant to be that fight. It's meant to be brutal and hard and aggressive. And I would give these sorts of references, and he would go off and work on it, and eventually Janice as well. And so that was a genuine treat. I'm trying to get better at appreciating the work that I've done and be like, yes, it's good. I guess I did a good job. But I can unabashedly gush about the music because I didn't work on it directly.
Right.
And it's fucking amazing. It's the soundtrack, and it's like 4
3.5 hours on it.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
It's
so much.
It's huge, and a lot of the tracks that are on that are sort of used in subtle ways in the main game, and so I can listen to the album and be like, I don't think I've heard this before. Like, he just made so much music that both of them did, so that was incredible. Also, Kevin Regamy is a secrets aficionado. He's the audio designer. He made a game about hiding secrets in audio.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's called, it might not be playable anymore because it was Flash, but it's called Phonopath.
Okay.
And that was the thing, like, level 1 is extract the audio and put it into a spectrographic analyzer and reverse it and find a secret code, right?
Phenomenal.
Like
Wow.
level 1. And so, actually, very early on, I sent a build to Power Up that was like, oh, we're thinking about working together. I sent them a build, and they put together an audio treatment for it. And at the end of it, it had, in Tunic glyph text, a message to me. And I was like, wait, what? I don't know how to read this. I know how to write it. I don't know how to read it. And anyway, suffice to say, Kevin had cracked the code immediately, because he's that invested in secrets and discovery and that sort of thing. And that was the point when I knew, like, yeah, we're going to work together.
Well, I fell into the trap of getting more vinyl records at Gamescom. Is there any chance we could see a vinyl release of Tunic?
I don't think there's any news on that, but the place to watch would be Lifeformed on Twitter. And yeah, I don't think there's like any official news, but lifeformed.com I think is probably the place to go because the album's on like every storefront.
Yeah. Sunset Breakfast is my wake-up ringtone in the morning. It's so, love it. I just really want to thank you. It's been a pleasure playing through this and just experiencing it. I'll probably experience it again on consoles that shall not be named. But no, it was great. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. As someone who wanted to make a game about secrets and made a game that they can never experience properly because they know all the things, having people tell me about their experiences is really special. So thank you.
This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.